Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. And this is a special episode where I get to discuss my views and my opinions on a couple of topics that are of interest in Formula One currently, and hopefully this will be out in time to keep that interest going for most of those people, and so that you might find some interesting information or viewpoints from my side of the track. So, without further ado, and thank you for actually viewing these, we will start off with Andretti's entry into F1. What is my opinion on this? I think it's a shame that they did not get their entry earlier in the field and being ready for this next year. But with 2026 around the corner, and they're kind of hinting at that he can reapply and be entered into that realm. I know there's still some issues. They're trying to make him competitive in the running because they don't think that he will be that competitive and just be a back runner in the field of joining the F1 field as that 11th team, and that will bring down the value of F1 as a whole. I think with Andretti's big name, that'll be a good entry for this, and they'll bring more interest from the U.S. and possibly some other places, but mainly from the U.S. because that's where they're kind of housed and lately, going through other race entries like IndyCar and NASCAR and the likes of that. So I'm sure their name is out there in the U.S. common folk that watch motorsports, and that might bring some more entry level people into F1. I think with their partnership with GM will be a good way to get that into the motorsport and help develop that engine and give that extra emphasis on the constructors. And yes, I know that they won't be ready for 2028, but I still think that's a good starting point because even though they'll be using a different manufacturer for engine, I think that'll actually help them get going, learn all the aerodynamic intricacies, however you say that, all the fine tuning, all the little wiggly bits that they like to say, on the wings and the side pods and the flooring, to try to help them get into that rhythm and be able to really develop around that engine that's getting developed. So generally, I think that's a really good idea. I like them coming in as 11th team. I think it'll add value to F1. Now, what I don't like is the whole U.S. Congress getting involved and trying to put pressure on the FIA and whatnot to let them in, thinking that it's more of a hustle to keep Andretti out. I think that gives a bad light on the whole situation. And if they get pushed in due to these things, I don't think the teams will have a good favorable light on Andretti. And so it'll be conflict and friction there throughout that season of them being in the running. And so I don't think that's a good value in that running. So I don't really like where that went. I think they should have kind of left that out and said, whatever, we're just going to proceed with the rules that were put in place. And yes, we may not agree with the outcomes of those rule sets, and they may think that they're subjective in some circumstances, but go ahead and play along and get in. I know they're pushing forward, and I like that. I like their tenacity and their just stubbornness and saying, nope, we are going to make our way to F1. So overall, I think it'll be good running for them. I just don't like the end method that it seems to be running into. So that's my quick synopsis of Andretti's entry into F1. Now for the next topic, where will Adrian Newey be going? Of course, we heard that nice announcement that he was leaving Red Bull due to some conflicts with that team. And I think it's good that he's leaving and going to join another team. I think that'll help that other team significantly. Unfortunately, I do think it's going to go to Ferrari. I know a lot of people like Ferrari, and that'll help them boost them up and really put a spotlight on them for that first position in the constructor standings, and they haven't really won one for a long time, so that's good. But I would rather have them go to like a Williams, kind of where he started off with, and bring that team back into contention. I think that'd be a lot better for the sport overall, having them fight with the Ferraris and the Red Bulls and the McLarens up there at the front, and the Mercedes as well in that running. So I think that would be a better fit for him. And of course, Aston Martin would be good as well, though I know that's kind of being ruled out in the running for possibly him going to. Now, in my personal opinion, I would love to see him go to Audi when they come in, but I really have a hard time seeing that as well, since there hasn't really been a lot of talk on that front. But I think them being the constructors coming in, I think that would be really cool to see him in that running, or Andretti, but Andretti's way down the road, far-fetched idea. So at this point, I would say Audi would be my favorite, even though it's not being talked about, and then Williams, then Ferrari in that running. So when that will announcement be made where he's going, I don't know. I expect it shouldn't take too long. They're probably negotiating, salaries and what position really they would be, as they would have to really carve out another role in Ferrari for him with all the other folks that they already have in place, and try to get him on board with what he wants. And so that'll be some struggles there on that contract negotiations, but I think that's coming. So that's my quick synopsis of Adrian Newey. Now we come to the fun part of the driver market. And I'll try to go through these fairly quickly because I don't want to be this super long video, but we will start off with the ones that actually we know are the current standings. So at Ferrari, we have Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. Of course, Lewis Hamilton jumping to Ferrari, really pushed the marker for all the driver market in the silly season, kind of pushed it way forward. And of course, the difference in rule sets coming in 2026 is also playing roles into where drivers will end up, because they want a little bit longer contracts to try to get into that new rule set to have a steady base before the new rule set comes in, and hopefully develop into that new rule set and get the most out of that. So with Lewis moving forward at kind of through the market wide open in a lot of the positions, even though I think it's kind of not really be that much for where Lewis comes from in Mercedes, and more of where Carlos Sainz is going to end up in the lower teams and how those higher end drivers will fit in. So we have that, and of course we have the McLaren pretty much set with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Pretty much set on those drivers. So what coming up? Now we have Aston Martin with Fernando Alonso signing on for a multi-year deal. And then, of course, we have that open position for Lance Stroll, but I really think Lance Stroll is going to be back, even though there's not a true contract for him. I don't foresee him going anywhere until he's ready, and I think he still wants to kind of have his foot in the door on F1 for a couple more years. Then we come to Stake F1 or Kick Stake F1, going to be Audi in 2026. I know they're coming in and investing pretty heavily. And we had that announcement with Nico Hülkenberg moving there from Haas, which kicks out at least one of the current drivers there. And I think Carlos Sainz is probably going to end up there, even though it's not going to be that great for the 2025 season. I think 2026 and onwards, when Audi really takes over fully and has the full constructors standing behind them, that will take off and running. But the other choices that I see, of course, are Red Bull and Mercedes, and I have a hard time seeing Carlos Sainz going back to Red Bull in that running, especially in that kind of sorted out where they, Perez is. And then, of course, Mercedes, they're looking for a short-term contract, and so I don't think he's going to make it in that running either. I think he's really looking for Red Bull, but I don't think they're going to actually choose him, and so he's going to end up at Audi or the Stake F1 team. So that's kind of my running, and of course, the farther I get in this, the more wild I get on my driver lineup. I've taken some pretty big risk and being bold on those driver lineups. So you will see that here coming up. Williams, of course, we have Alex Albon announcing today that he was extending his contract with Williams. So that kind of locks that seat in. And I'm pretty sure Kimi Antonelli is going to be in that other seat at Williams. I know they're having a tryout session, or they're trying to get permission to do that tryout session this weekend for him to drive around that in the practice session. And I don't think that's necessarily for Mercedes, even though I think Mercedes has the eye on them. I don't think Mercedes is going to push them to their main team right away. I think Antonelli really hasn't shown what he can do, potentially in F2 right now. He's kind of farther back in the pack. So I think Mercedes is going to hold off on bringing him to the main team. So they're going to put him and have a deal with Williams to be that second seat in Williams and replace Sargent, who has been struggling. And of course, there's rumors of that already, that they might replace him mid-season. So there is that. So I think that's kind of set. Now, Mercedes, of course, you have George Russell locked into that seat. Who's going to pair him? I think because they were going to hold off and they want a short-term contract, that Esteban Ocon is going to take the risk of leaving Alpine and move to Mercedes, because he's kind of that Mercedes background. And so he has, I think, a good relationship with Toto Wolff. And he's going to move into that spot temporarily for a couple of years and hopefully kind of shine in that role where he can get picked up by another team in 2027. That's kind of my thought pattern there. That's why I chose him, because I don't think Kimi's going to be ready for that Mercedes seat per se, directly coming from the lower end fields. So they're going to have that open seat, and who's going to want a short-term contract with their eye on him? So I don't think Carlos Sainz is going to jump to that Mercedes. So who else would that be? Max. I don't think Max has shown any interest per se. I think he's pretty happy currently, at least with Red Bull. So he's probably going to kind of leave it at that point as well with that contract that he has. So I kind of put the risk on Esteban Ocon. I think he's been at Alpine for quite a while, and that'll give him the opportunity to get a different perspective, see if he can shine, see if he can move up in the field. And I think he's going to take that risk. So, of course, we were talking about Red Bull here. So I think Max Verstappen, of course, is going to stay there. And then that leaves that open seat, which I think Perez is going to end up in that spot. They basically said that it's his spot to lose. And so far, he's not really showing why they should remove him and take a risk on somebody else, especially when the other drivers they were doing were not quite up to that par of what they think will be alongside of Max. So I think he'll end up staying there at Red Bull, at least for a couple of years, and then they'll try to look to see who else is on the market and see if anybody else is coming up through the ranks that they can put in that seat. Now we come to Alpine, which is going to have two open seats. And I think since Esteban Ocon is leaving, I think Gasly will stay, as they probably doesn't want to leave to go somewhere else right away. And so he's going to stay with Alpine, and he's going to be joined by his old teammate Yuki Tsunoda, who is going to try to leave the Red Bull because they really haven't shown interest in promoting him up the ranks. And so being at that RB team, I think he'll say, hey, let me get out of this so I can kind of get a different perspective on the driver's market and hopefully move into better seats potentially. So I think he's going to join his old teammate at Alpine. And that'll throw things around for RB, but I think that'll be good. He's doing fairly well this season for Yuki. And so I think that'll, play into this role of him joining a supposed constructors team and kind of running from there instead of being that sister team of Red Bull. Hopefully trying to get in alongside of Max, but not really getting the attention that he wants or probably even deserves at some point. So I think he's going to end up going to Alpine. Then we have Haas. Of course, we have Oliver Behrman. Very confident that he's going to join that team, as he's shown quite well what he can do in a Ferrari. So they're going to throw him in that Haas team, that sister Ferrari team, kind of let him develop a little bit, see how he performs before potentially moving him to the Ferrari team. And of course, that would mean that Lewis or Charles would have to leave, and that would put some interesting things there. But I think for the time being, at least for a couple of years, they'll run at the Haas team, kind of develop into that Formula One car, kind of show him what he can do, and then move up potentially in a couple of years. And then they need a strong, probably a veteran driver. And I kind of threw Valtteri Bottas because he doesn't look like he is wanted at the state kick F1 team any longer, changing his engineer without really giving him a say or notifying him for the most part until the race week. So I think he's feel unwanted there, and him being a former champion winner of some of these races and kind of being with Mercedes, I think that'll play into having a good role to develop the Haas car and the setups that they will need with a young driver in that second seat. So I think Valtteri will come back and replace Kevin Magnussen, who I feel sorry for coming back to that second chance. And he's playing a really good team player lately, but he really hasn't shown what he can do currently in that seat. And with Valtteri being on the market at this point, I think he will drop down, and think that Haas is probably has a decent chance of building up comparatively last year. So I think he'll end up in that seat, which kind of kicks out Kevin Magnussen to hopefully find something else that he can do. But I have him kind of out of this lineup, unfortunately. And of course, it gets to RB, and this was a hard one for me, in the sense I know Leon Lawson's coming in. Pretty sure of that, with the rumors that basically he was almost guaranteed that seat, which means, Yuki or Daniel were kicked out, and I'm deciding that Yuki's moving forward and Daniel's not showing what he can do. He's had that one good sprint race, but then besides that, he's kind of floundered. Now, of course, he may have had his mojo back when they changed that chassis, and it was just an off race, per se, after that sprint race. So we'll have to see how that plays out in that running. So if he continues the way he is, I don't think they're going to renew him, and so they're going to have to find a new driver for that. And so I put in Dennis Hauger in that Red Bull team. He's an upcoming, Red Bull younger driver in the F2 series, and I think that he will end up playing a role in that RB setup, kind of finishing out that. So that kicks out Logan Sargent, Daniel Ricciardo, and Guan Yu Zhou, which kind of throws a wrench in that part as well, because of him being a China driver, getting that funding. I could have seen him at Haas, but I have a hard time seeing him being the veteran driver. He's still fairly new in the sense of his perception in F1, being the younger teammate of Valtteri. So I don't think he'll end up in that role, but it's a possibility. Then, of course, Kevin Magnussen will be out as well from the Haas team. So those are the four that I pulled out. And basically the four that I put in are, or those here in the RB, the Haas, and then Williams with Kimi Antonelli going into that role. So what were your thoughts? What was your lineup? Did you have a more conservative lineup, or do you have a crazy lineup like I do on what's coming up and all the turmoil and the rules changes? So we're trying to get people in before that, so they can get a baseline and all of that. So I'm kind of interested in what you thought of this. If you thought I was wild and crazy, or you like my opinions on my lineup. So what else is coming up? Of course, we have the Imola race this weekend. It's a standard back to the standard format race. So we have practice sessions and the race on Sunday. And so if you want to hear my opinion and my post-race reaction for that race, feel free to subscribe, and I appreciate you viewing this far. And if you could give a thumbs up, I would appreciate that as well. Until then, farewell, and see you on the grid.